episode is part of our 10-part series on the Black experience in Austin. It's part of our larger commitment to similar series on the Latinx, Hispanic, Asian Pacific, and Native American Indigenous experiences in Austin. As we said in our public statement on racial equity, we're moved by a new sense of urgency to heighten our community's consciousness of institutional racism and systemic impediments to racial equity, and to aggressively progress on the continuum to racial equity, to fulfill America's promise to all of its inhabitants. You can access recordings of earlier episodes and register for future programs at nonprofit-austin.org/civil-season-4/. I'll repeat that again later. My guest today is Kimberly Keaton, African-American Community Archivist and Librarian at the Austin History Center, which is part of the Austin Public Library. She received her Master's in Library Science in 2014 from the University of North Texas. She's an entrepreneurial woman of many talents who describes herself as a creative interdisciplinary mixologist and scholar. She tells me she made that term up herself, and I look forward to hearing her explain what that is in a few minutes. In the May 2020 Library Journal, she's cited as a mover and shaker. The column entitled "Rooted in Community" states, and I quote, "Her job description involves curating and preserving African-American history in the Austin area." But Kimberly Keaton goes well beyond that. She leads genealogy workshops to help African-Americans trace their roots and organizes public forums that bring African-American history to life for area residents and connect them with a sense of identity. Archivists were traditionally behind the scenes, but a 21st century librarian is in front of the scenes, she says. We're more embedded within our community. The article continues. When she arrived in Austin in 2018, Keeton learned about the impact gentrification has had on the city's demographics, forcing many African-American families out to surrounding communities. She's made it her mission to preserve the legacy of these families and their contributions to Austin's history. When we arranged for this conversation, Kimberly emphasized that she was a Black woman and more than an archivist. So welcome, Kimberly. Good to have you on. So let's start by giving you an opportunity to amplify on that point about being a Black woman and more than an archivist.
Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you, Barry, for inviting me to come out and have this virtual conversation with you this morning. The sun is shining in Texas. I would say, me being African American, I love it. I like being Black. I like who I am. I derive from many different women who have helped me become who I am today. And that is not just on my mother's side of my family, but also my father's side of my family. And not just my family, but my history in general, as far as African-American people. I think being a Black woman is magical, is sexy, is, we're needed today. And not just today, but just throughout history. And I think for myself and where I'm at in life, it's cool to be independent. It's cool to love who you are. Mm-hmm. As who I am today, being all that I am, I don't like to put myself in a bowl and say, well, we're just gonna put 3 different types of seasonings in that bowl. No, when you open up a cabinet, typically at your grandmother's house, there are like 50 million different types of seasonings. And I think that speaks to who I am, that I have a lot of flavor. And I will not allow others to put me in a box. And I think that's fair for my life. I can't speak for others, but with who I am, I mean, if you met me in person, you wouldn't want to put me in a box because we would be everywhere. I would have you everywhere, you know, creatively, scholarly, through history, etc., etc. So, yeah.
How would you describe yourself if you were going to use one word? How would you describe yourself?
Kimberly,
Kimberly. Okay.
that's my name.
Why?
Yes, and I actually have four names. My name is Kimberly Maisha Dion Keeton. So I know when my mother named me, she named me with a purpose in mind, that I would do great things. I didn't know when, but you know, it's happened. And I think she's proud. She's not with us today, but I believe she's proud.
Matters. So let's before we get into your center role and we talk about the Black experience in Austin, although it certainly relates to it, tell us about the Art Library Deco, the online African American digital library that you founded and curated. Why
Well,
did you do it and what is it?
as a master's student at the University of North Texas, you're asked to do a practicum. And I think I was probably one of like three people who were considered, and it's creative. So I asked if I could complete my practicum at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston in Houston, Texas, as well as the African American Museum of Culture in Houston too. So in having those experiences, I realized that I am a curator, I am a librarian, but I'm an artsy librarian, and I had to think about what I really want to do with my practicum. So I decided to create an online art library, and it was just a practicum, just something that I had to show, but it turned out to be something major in my life and would be a part of my life's work. And I'm sorry, that's my dog, if you hear her in the background. So I just wanted to make that notation. But
Just makes the audience larger.
Art Library Deco is an online African American digital library where we curate African American news. We talk about African American political issues as it pertains to the arts, as well as it has a comprehensive repository and art live guide. It offers you many different things. So if you're interested, you can check out artlibrarydeco.space, artlibrarydeco.space. And, share feedback. Let me know what you think about it. Subscribe, because every library is free. It should be in America. And mine is. So
We'll make sure that the URL is on the webpage so people
okay.
can. So given your background,
Mm-hmm.
what led you to accept a position, I guess, 2 years ago at the History Museum?
Well, I was in transition early in my career. Um, I started out at Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri, which was my first position as a librarian at a historically Black college university, which was an amazing experience for me. However, in the world that I work in, it's getting to the point where, you stay in a position for 2 to 3 years and then it's time to move on. And I felt like that it was time for me to be more community oriented. And I didn't feel like at that time academia was, I would say, putting the community on its list, though it's embedded within the community. And though it has a community on campus, which are the students, professors, faculty, et cetera, et cetera, I felt as though, in doing a little research, working with arts commissions, et cetera, that they were not, embedded within the community like they needed to be. So I started, basically, I went on my own for a year and did my own thing as far as a librarian, entrepreneurial librarianship. Then I decided to apply for positions and I just put my name out there. And from my understanding, the position that I have today, there's another position at the Denver Public Library that was just created that models what I do. So the first position was created at Emory for African American Community Archivist. then this position, and then there's now one at the Denver Public Library. And I think that I chose right. I chose right. I'm a native Texan. I was born in Fort Worth. So, to come back home, and I would like to add this, that when I was in Missouri, Jefferson City is named after Thomas Jefferson. I was at a historically Black college, which was situated downtown, and rarely did I see African American people until I went to work. I think Jefferson City is probably like about 70, it's about the population 70,000, and it's probably 2% African American. So that was just startling, coming from Texas, from Houston, you know, moving to a small town and not being able to see culture, just in general.
Why
So,
was the college located there then?
excuse me?
Why was the college located there?
Well, now that's another interesting story. During the Civil War, there were two Texans who were African American and one general who was Caucasian that decided that there needed to be a university in Jefferson City, Missouri. So as they were passing through Missouri, they met with some people who met with some people. They got some money together and they built Lincoln University.
Interesting.
Yes, it's very interesting. So, looking at that, then thinking about coming back home, not knowing I will be coming to the state capitol. I visited, a couple of times. But when I saw the position, I felt like it was befitting for me.
So what does a African American community archivist do at the Austin History Center?
Well, for me, I think I've put the position on a whole new plateau. Because I think a traditional archivist is behind the scenes. Rarely do you see them unless you want to look at a collection. Uh, I like to use my degree that I hold, which is a librarian. So when I came into the position, I made sure that was a part of my title, because librarianship has a lot to do with outreach. Being an archivist has to do with, I would say, being more of a scholar, because you do need to know history. You do need to know what you're talking about. You do need to know what collections you're dealing with and what you're sharing with the community, as well as, I would say, just knowing proper procedure of handling, different collections or memorabilia. Now, as far as like the innovative portion, I feel as though I've made my position more personable. You know, I've gotten a lot of compliments about coming to Austin and having coffee with a lot of people that I paid for. But sitting down, taking the time to, and they pay for it too, because I know some people may call me. But um, you know, taking the time to pick up the phone to meet with the city manager, the assistant city manager, the mayor, the library director, some of the branch managers, the director of Six Square, some of the local restaurants, coffee shops. I think, that's how you get to know the community. And once you get to know the community from that standpoint, then you can assess the community. So I did that really quickly when I got here. I know I met at least 30 people within 2 months. I came in with a mission to make sure that I knew people, so I can understand what I was taking on in regards to just finding out about gentrification in Austin, and you know the percentages of Black people who have left Austin. How do you tell that story when they're no longer here? So that was a question that I got to answer a lot of different, ask a lot of different people.
So what would I find at the Austin History Center? I suspect most people have not visited the building. So
Well,
what would I find there if I was looking for specifically what you do, African American history, the interrelationship with the Anglo community, etc.? So what would I find there?
you would find historical documents, photos, um, class reunion books, yearbooks, high school yearbooks, newspapers, maps, um, digital files. We have this thing called the Austin files. Um, it mainly depends on what you're seeking, and that's the velour of what we do as archivists. And I think it's kind of like a high when you come in, because we're waiting on you to ask us a question of, where is this? And all I can say is that you need to have a question so I can go seek out and find if we have what you're looking for.
That leads me to my next question. I have a question. So, and I know this is sort of simple on one level and difficult on another level, but what are three aspects of the history of Blacks in the greater Austin area that you feel, from your perspective of what you're looking at, both micro and macro, that folks in Austin, either African American Black folks or white folks, ought to know?
Well, you need to know that Austin was incorporated in 1839. That's very important to know, because Houston was the first state capital of Texas, if you really want to know Texas's history. And you need to understand why that happened in regards to Sam Houston. So that's another story, but I would start there. Then, as far as like just the African American story, one thing I like to share with people often, which I did earlier this week in a previous conversation, is that, Houston Tillotson was the first institution in Austin. Like, we must acknowledge that. The first institution, regardless of race, creed, color, etc. It was the first institution. And UT Austin is sitting on and in front of one of the first African American freedom communities, which is Wheatville, created by James Wheat. And I think that people should know that.
What, if you could, because I'm not sure everybody would understand. When you say a freedom community, can you describe what that is?
That is a community that African Americans after slavery created without any issues from the white community. So, maybe they had some friends from that community that helped them establish in regards to dollars, economics, but pretty much African Americans created these communities from the top to the bottom. And that goes with economics, education, and religion. And one person that I would like to include in that story about Wheatville would be Jacob Fontaine, which that should be a name that, a lot of people know. If you don't, you should get to know who Jacob Fontaine is, who was a religious leader, an educator, writer, the first publisher, African-American publisher in Austin, created the Gold Dollar newspaper, which was a part of Wheatville. But I think that's very important history that, I know many students who attend UT Austin do not know that they are sitting on sacred grounds. Mm-hmm. And you would have a different feeling if you knew about that versus you just enrolling into UT and going to the school. Another thing that I would say, my third thing would be that Black people in Austin are not monolithic. We're not all the same. We're different. This is an artistic place. It used to be, I don't know what's going on today, but in that sense, but, Black people are not monolithic. We're lawyers, we're writers, we're librarians, we own businesses, so don't be so quick to judge as if you know everyone from our community, because you don't. If you don't know my name, if you don't know I have 4 names, then you don't know me.
All right. So now I know you. I know all 4 names.
Yes, you did.
So to drive that point home that you just made, that the African American Black community is not monolithic and has different perspectives on both historic and current events. what's your, as someone who's an archivist who preserves history, okay, who looks at what happened in the past and tries to find relevance for the present, what's your thoughts about the controversies that are now underway about monuments and so forth that purportedly honor and memorialize things like the Confederacy or individuals who may have done great things, but at the same time were slaveholders and so forth. What's your thoughts on that? What do you think we ought to be doing in terms of dealing with those issues?
Well, for myself as a historian, I disagree wholeheartedly with taking down statues. And I would like to give an example, a brief example. I did an oral history with Miss Hertha Glenn, who's 100 years old, who's also a historian, taught at Houston-Tillotson, taught, history, US history to be exact. And when we did this oral history, I asked her the same question you just asked me. She's 100 years old. And she told me she didn't agree, because how can we teach history to the future generations and the current generations about what took place in these United States if these monuments are taken down, if these books are taken off shelves, if certain images are coming out of museums, just because people feel uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable for Africans to be taken from one continent, placed in the Middle Passage, brought to these, Virginia plantations in 1619. That was uncomfortable, and does it feel good when you see Thomas one thing I would like to say is when I went to DC the last time, I noticed that Thomas Jefferson was the only president, the only leader to be in all his, it's all marble and it's black. Lincoln is sitting somewhere chilling, and all of the other, it's just it's interesting when you're looking at these monuments, and they got Jefferson far away from everybody. And that's, I just figured that out the last time I went to DC. But in that moment, I thought a lot about Thomas Jefferson and what he brought to history, what he brought to Missouri. But had I not seen that statue, and I'm just giving you what took place in my own mind, how would I have known he wrote the Declaration of Independence if I wasn't taught that in school? How would I have known? I didn't even know he was a slave owner until I started getting into, learning more about my history. So I don't think it's right. I don't think it's fair. It's erasing history. That's what it is. At the end of the day, you're erasing history. And why are you doing that? And I feel as though it's to make people feel comfortable. African-American people shouldn't feel comfortable about their history. What happened to us happened. To my ancestors happened. There are certain things that have happened to me in present day. I don't want to erase these things. I want to be able to have conversations about them, such as now. So, I think for myself, and I know a lot of people probably disagree with me, and that's okay. But what would you like for me to teach your child? What books would you like for me to put on a book list for them? Do you want everything to be pristine and beautiful? Or do you want the truth? Because that's what we take an oath to give as historians and librarians and archivists and, all of these titles that we have today. It's about truth. In my world. So, yeah.
Interesting response. As you say, there are a lot of fellow Black folks and white folks and others who would vehemently disagree, but I think that you make a cogent perspective on that. So you do a lot of work, I believe, in genealogy.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It is a personal love of mine. And I know that there are special issues that come up trying to trace Black history, those people who came over in the Middle Passage. How do you overcome those challenges? How do you overcome, in some cases, the paucity of records? and so forth?
I say you have to keep going. You have to keep going. One thing about genealogy is that you're going to have your brick walls. You're going to have your moments where you need to take a vacation from the work. You're going to have your moments where you need to pause and just reflect over what you have collected. Also, I think when it comes to African American people, some people don't want to know what happened, because as it pertains to the African American story, we're going to visit slavery, and it's coming. Somewhere along the lines is going to come. You're going to hopefully meet those families that enslaved you as well. Some people aren't ready for that. Some people aren't ready, for learning that, their grandfather was married to 2 different women. Like, this happens, But I think the main thing where people fall off, not just African American people, just people in general, is that number one, you're quick to go get a DNA test and think you know your history. You know a little bit. Then number two, when it comes to the African American demographic, one thing that African Americans have to understand is that we were not considered human until 1870. We were not considered human beings until 1870. That's when our names, actual names, are printed on census records. Now, prior to that, our names were on census records, but it just depends on what statue your family was a part of, because there were free slaves as well. And, free people, I'm sorry. So I think when you think about genealogy, and as a genealogy curator, I say that's the biggest hiccup, that people can get to the 1940 census, which is a beautiful document because everybody's information is on the 1940 census. And then as you're traveling back in time, they get to 1900, they get to 1910, they get to 1890. And then when you get to 1870, things start to look different, because you're trying to go back. You're trying to go back to Africa. That's where you're trying to get to. You're trying to get to Virginia, actually. And then when you get to Virginia, then, that's a whole nother can of worms right there. But I believe it's that stumbling block of 1870, So, and I would say, it's a lot of people ask me as a genealogy curator, have I ever had my DNA done? And I say no, because I believe in footsteps, I think it's much more alluring, and, I'm an investigative reporter. So, I like, figuring out things. And one thing I would like to add to end that for me, as far as the answer is, I don't know if you're religious. I wouldn't just ask you that, but I would tell people that you will meet God during this journey if you've never met him before. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of these voices that you hear. Don't be afraid of the dreams that you have that come to you. Because if you truly want to know your history, those things are going to happen.
Well, I did meet God in my research, and she told me. Right. Right. So we're about to open it up to, we have some guests, some viewers. But before we open to the viewers, okay, and this may be a little tough question for you because compared to me, at least, you're on the younger side, okay? So you've done a lot in your relatively short life, okay? A lot of activities, a lot of interests, etc. But if you go back to before you went to college, when you were still figuring out what you were going to do with yourself, given where you are right now, what would you tell that younger little girl about the world that you wanted to become in?
You're special. Continue to love your Blackness. Know that the world that you're coming into is not ready, but you are. I think that's what my grandmother probably said to my mother as she was pushing me out of her womb. Probably, because I was the favorite. I hope my cousins aren't on here, but I was the fourth born of the first four grandchildren, so I was the baby. I got a lot of attention, as you probably can tell right now. But
No, you come across
yeah,
an extreme introvert.
okay.
Just, just, just
But no, I would. That's what. Yeah, I thought about that last night too when I saw that, and then I would, I would say, don't be afraid. It's okay to fail, and I don't consider failure a bad thing. I think it's like another test to see if you're going to try something else. So
thank
yeah,
you.
that's a good question too.
Well, I've got a bunch more, but I want to give our audience an opportunity to ask questions. And if they don't come up with brilliant questions like mine, I'll just have to
Yeah, because
ask
you have brilliant questions.
questions. Kate, can we open this up to the audience, please? So as we're opening it up, I'm assuming everybody can hear me right now. Um, I don't see any questions right now in the chat, but I want to give an opportunity to those who are viewing right now. Does anybody have a question to ask Kimberly? Or do you want to suffer through my questions?
Why don't you go ahead, Barry, and we'll give them a chance to join in here in just a moment.
Okay. So Kimberly, you grew up, as you said, in the, well, I guess you were still young in the 80s.
Yes. I'll be
Uh,
44 on September 7th, Labor Day.
so your mom stopped pushing sometime in the early 80s.
Oh, God. She would kill you.
So, so you grew up in a world which was post the civil rights movement, although obviously the struggle for human rights, civil rights, Black Lives Matter obviously is still a major evolving challenge in our society.
Right.
So you grew up in an environment which was very different, obviously, than your parents, and
Right.
certainly, um, very, very different than your grandparents.
Mhm.
So, what do you project as an historian, as one who looks at the past, obviously who's very engaged in the present? What do you project is going to be the racial experience of the current generation? Um,
I would say, I think it's going to be the digital divide. Uh, I've heard so much in the last, 6 months? This all jumped off really for us.
yeah, that's
Uh, I, and as a librarian, as a scholar, I would say it would be the digital divide because we've yet to answer that question. We're fighting over education and if kids should go to school. But I don't know if we made sure that all of those kids are equipped with what they need in order to learn, which has always been a part of the educational system. So I think it's still going to be the defining factor that Dr. King hoped for all children, for all generations, that they be educated, that they know their history. And I think that's going to be the defining factor because when you have technology, you can be that entrepreneur. You can do so many things online. And I know it's overwhelmed so many people in this country because they thought having, this was technology. This is just a tool to talk to people and to access some parts of technology. But I think people actually got a lesson in what technology really is during this pandemic and that they know nothing about technology. Not to say that the present generation, the millennials, and I don't even know what new name is after them, but um, they know technology, but they know this. And if you've listened to a lot of the interviews, read some reports in newspapers, the complaints come from not understanding how to use technology, but you can scroll on your phone. You know how to but do you know how to interact? Do you know how to communicate? Do you know how to upload a paper to Canvas? You know, do you know how to research, which has a lot to do with information science and librarianship, finding, um, researching, and knowing how to present information to other people. I think, you know, the digital divide and a lack of skills. Because it's one thing to know how to answer a phone and game and get on Facebook and IG. It's another when you have to do Python and use that as a source to create a poem for a professor, you know, and that has to do with data. When I look at myself going into a PhD program, I think when I come out, I'll be in the top 1% as far as African American women that have data science PhDs. And that's going to be in 2024. You know, let's pray for that, that I get across that stage. But I think the digital divide and, you know, just the skill set, because we're churning out all different types of new jobs as we speak right now, virtually. Like all of these jobs are turning into virtual positions. And you have to know how to manipulate data, you know, all kinds of stuff. That's an overloaded question. I think it's a good question though.
So you bring up that you're going to be one of a relatively small number of Black data scientists. Okay. Probably limited number of women as well. So
Right.
you're going to be even in a smaller group being a Black woman. So,
Right.
so what have been your experiences as a young Black archivist? I suspect, as you made reference before, there aren't a hell of a lot of folks like you. So what have been some of your experiences in that? And would you recommend this as a career to someone, a young Black woman?
Well, I'd like to acknowledge that I am the only African American archivist librarian at the Austin History Center.
Right.
You know, and I think that's very important when we look at the Austin Public Library system and its history. Um, do I think this is an amazing career platform? Yes, indeed. Being a librarian or an archivist, because you serve others. You know, that's the golden rule of life, serving, which you get to do. You get to meet a lot of amazing people from a myriad of backgrounds. One thing that I would like to share with the audience is that there are 4 different types of librarians: public, special, school, and academic. So one thing that I would say, if you would like to get into this profession, know which one you are. I'm a special librarian, meaning that creative and all this other stuff. But I think that's very important. Also having mentors. Already going into this PhD program, I have 4 that I'm meeting with tomorrow. That's outside of the institution. I think that's very important just in life in general, to have mentors, regardless of your age. You know, it's just a good driving force to have in your life. Is this a good profession? As being an archivist, it's a different world because it's mainly white. I'm gonna be frank about that. It's white, very white. But you know, today I think it's fair to be radical. It's okay. You know, you have to put it in its context though, what being radical is, you know. And I would say think about those things, because you have to be an advocate for change. You just can't sit back and just let things happen. Is it a racist profession? Yes, it is. Very much so, on both ends of the spectrum. Very much so. So if you're not ready to deal with that, because we're talking about information, we're talking about African American people being told that they cannot read, that you cannot write. Those things are still embedded in people's minds today, in librarianship, in archives. So I think it's something to really think about, because you gotta like people. If you don't like people, you shouldn't be a part of this profession at all, regardless of race, because you gotta like people.
You've just killed my librarian career.
Like, you gotta you gotta be cool with people.
Yeah.
So, and it's a different breed of us out here now, the 21st century librarians. You know, we all look different. Most people, when they ask me, you know, what do you do? And it's like, you're like, yes, I am. Do you need a book today? So, yeah.
Yeah. Let me turn back to our audience and give them another opportunity. I would just say this is your last opportunity, audience. If you have any questions, if not, I'm going to ask a closing question and we'll move on. So, any questions out there?
Oh, this is the first time I've had any questions all week. This is good.
That's because you've done a great job. So, in closing, and you made reference to this before, okay? Who have been some of your mentors? And more important than their names is what did they share with you? What did they give you? What did you take from them? Whatever words you want to use, that has brought you to this point of being, you know, forthright, creative, and to a great extent, a visionary. So who helped you get here? And what did they give you?
You know, that like tears are behind my little glasses right now. Because when you think about that question and you think about right now where we are in this pandemic, you have to be grateful for those people. You have to be grateful so you continue to go on. I will never forget what Dr. Rhea Lawson in Houston, Texas, asked me one day in her office, this big, huge picture of President Obama before he became president. And I sat on one of her couches in her office, and like her office, she oversees all of downtown Houston. I was just like, oh my God, like this, I gotta have, like, how do I get this? Like, you're on the 18th floor. What did you do? And she's like 6 feet tall and just this regal Black woman. And she's like, why are you crying? I'm like, well, you're like, look who you are. What do you want to do with your life? Like, I think that was one of the greatest questions in that moment for me before I got into librarianship like I am now. I think, you know, the support of the women in my family, my mother, my grandmother, and my favorite aunt. In 2015, I lost my mother and my mom's baby sister within 2 months. And just looking back on a day-to-day basis, just their love and support of me being an artist, my mom always being cool with me creating installations. And I know she paid for a lot for those walls that I messed up and damaged, but she allowed me and my brother's an architect, my sister's a chef. She allowed us to be ourselves. And how many parents on this earth allows that to happen? And made sure that we were in the schools that we needed to be in to foster those gifts and talents that we have today. And then I would just say, my homie Jesus, I have to always give him credit. You know, like, without that relationship, because I have no parents. My grandparents on both sides are gone. My parents are gone, and I'm only 44. I lost my mother at 38. I lost my father at 6, the age of 6. So who do great question, mentors. It's been a plethora of people who've been in my life who have made sure that I'm good, and the times that I'm not good, the moments that I need to be put in my place, they weren't afraid to do that. Because I have a mighty little spirit here, And, at this juncture, I allow you to do that. And only a few people can go there with me. But I thank God for that rearing. I thank them today in this moment for not letting go of me, and making sure that I made it to this moment, to this pinnacle of success.
I think
And it feels good. It feels good.
It should. That I think is a very, very important message. More than anything else is people not letting go.
Yes.
And being
And we
willing.
need them so much right now. We need those mentors right now.
Speaking
I
truth.
encourage you to become one if you're not.
Yep. Well, that is a phenomenal way to bring us to a close. Kimberly, I thank you very, very much. This has been a pleasure. I thank those who have been watching and remind you that a recording of this will be online. And Kate has just put the URL up on the chat, which is nonprofit-austin.org/civil-society-season-4. Thank you all for participating, and a special thank you to Kate Tolliver, our managing producer, for her usual excellent support. There she is. You can read more about Kimberly Keaton, the Austin History Center, and the issues we discussed, as well as links to the art digital library that Kimberly has created and now curates, and view previous and future episodes at the URL I just mentioned. So thank you, Kimberly, again. Thank you, everybody. Hope you all have a great and safe day.
Thank you so much, Barry and Kate. I thoroughly appreciate it.